Welcome, and good evening. You've found your way back to Sleepy History, where we leave behind the clamor of the present and gently descend into the softened pages of the past. Tonight, we are stepping into a world of bronze and quiet palaces and ancient tales, of empire, of myth, and of longing.
Ow!
Tonight, you'll meet a boy who was born into prophecy. A boy who would one day be called divine. And yet who, like all of us, once stared at the stars with questions. Walk the slow marches eastward, pause among whispering scribes in royal courts, and peer softly into the shadows of a missing tomb. Quietly, not in the way we would imagine. You lift the lid from a cracked clay pot and scrape out the barley mush made the night before. Thick, slightly sour, dense. The handle rubs your hand raw, though the wood is worn smooth by generations. Walk barefoot down a narrow, rutted path, careful to avoid the stones. They're small but sharp, and your soles, though toughened by time, still sting with each step, or no windows. A tunic, coarse, brown or gray, maybe dyed faintly with onion skins or elderberry, if your family can afford it. You prune vines, gather manure, carry heavy baskets of crushed olives. If you're a girl, you work beside your mother, spinning wool, weaving cloth, scrubbing pots, carrying your baby brother while she bakes. If you're young enough, you help wherever hands are needed. If you're old enough to walk, you're old enough to labor. It smells faintly of old sweat and wood smoke. Foot traps are sandals made from old leather. There's no changing wardrobe, no closet, only what you wear. Your mother wears hers every day until it unravels, then she patches it, and it becomes rags for the baby. Only a smoke hole that lets in a thread of light, and sometimes rain. The walls are cracked, but patched, painted faintly with lime wash where the surface hasn't crumbled. The roof is thatched with reeds, laid tightly and sealed with earth, but it still leaks when the spring storms come. On the way, you pass the baker's hut. A woman with hair tied in a waxed cloth is already kneading dough with cracked knuckles. You nod. She does not look up. It smells of smoke and grain, with just a hint of goat's milk, if you were lucky enough to have some. This is the only meal you'll eat until nightfall. If there are figs, you'll share them. If there's oil left, it's sparing. Most mornings begin without words, your siblings. 4 of them, perhaps more, are still asleep nearby, limbs overlapping in tangled piles. The smallest is curled against your mother's side. Your father is already gone, or perhaps sitting silently on a stool, repairing a sandal, or sharpening a tool by firelight. His face is carved with the lines of long labor. Not old, but worn, like leather used too often in the sun. There will be no battles here, no thunder of hooves, only the quiet footfalls of history. His name is Alexander, not the world of maps, but of ridgelines and footpaths. You live in a village near Pella, the capital of Macedon, though you've never seen the palace. The bucket, once full, is heavier than you'd like, but you carry it back anyway, fingers clinging to the wood as it sloshes. Only heard rumors of it, like myths passed around a fire. You know of King Philip, of course, and of his son Alexander. But these are names of people you'll never meet. Theirs is a world of shining armor and purple cloaks. Yours is a world of mud, wool, and patience. Let the weight of the day slip away. Not a hero, just someone ordinary and alive. In the world Alexander inherited, you're someone simpler, a young farmhand, a potter's child, perhaps the daughter of a goat herd in the dusty hill country of northern Greece. And breathe, slowly. History remembers him as the great. But here, we'll speak of him not as a conqueror in marble, but as a child, a student, a restless soul, and finally, a mystery. Over the next 10 segments, we'll drift through the dust of ancient Macedonia. So lie back. Now imagine you are not a king. Cool, smelling faintly of smoke and goatskin. You lie, curled on a woven mat atop a floor of packed earth, your back aching faintly from yesterday's work. A draft slips under the wooden lintel, rustling the frayed reed curtain that marks the entrance. The hearth has gone cold, and there is no fire to welcome the day, only gray ash and the thin remnants of yesterday's coals. Let us begin. Imagine you are not a king, not even a soldier. The year is 340 BCE, and your world is small. Let's begin at dawn. The air is still, You rise slowly.
There is no breakfast waiting for you.
And now, to work. You carry a bucket to the village well. The well is deeper than it looks, and the rope is frayed. As you pull the water, your shoulders ache. Water is precious, every drop. In your home, a single-room mud brick house with no chimney. The fire is rekindled with dried twigs and manure. Smoke clings to the ceiling. Your clothing is simple. If you're a boy, you may be expected to join your father, tending the vineyard or working in the fields. You're always watching for soldiers. Macedon is a kingdom of war. King Philip has conquered much of Greece by now, and his armies are always on the move. You know what a levy means? What it means when the men in armor ride into town, their spears like flags in the wind. Your cousin was taken last year. He was 17. Remember his face? Wide-eyed, defiant? He hasn't come back. Sometimes they don't return at all. Other times they come back different. Quiet, distant, limping. When they speak, it is only of horses and death. Of course there are gods. You've seen their statues in the village square. Though they are weathered, chipped, their paint long gone. You make offerings to Heracles or to Zeus, though just as often you call on lesser spirits. The ones who live in streams or under rocks. You leave small coins at shrines, whisper prayers before cutting a goat's throat, but you don't ask questions. Questions are not encouraged in a Macedonian household, especially not from children. Just the flicker of firelight playing across the walls. You sit beside it, darning a hole in your tunic, listening to the wood pop softly. What do you believe in? You don't learn to read, unless you are the child of someone rich or connected? You lie down on your mat, next to your brothers and sisters, and close your eyes. The night air carries the faint sound of dogs barking, of someone coughing in another house, of the slow creak of a door. You are not safe exactly, but you are used to this world, its rhythms, its quiet cruelty. The world of scrolls and letters belongs to boys like Alexander, not to you. You learn from your elders. How to mend a net, how to sharpen a blade with sandstone. His food is warm, his hair is combed. His name is Alexander. How to seal a jar so that mice can't get in. These are the lessons that matter. There are gods. Some days, you visit the seer, a woman who speaks in riddles, her eyes lined with coal and age. She tells your mother that the moon is in an unlucky phase, and that your older sister should not marry before the next harvest. You believe her. Everyone does. Barley again. Perhaps with lentils, if the traders came last week, or onions, or a thin broth made from boiled greens. Your father talks little, his hands busy knotting a new rope. Your mother hums softly as she rocks the baby. No one speaks of the future. It's only of next week's chores, of the merchant with strange herbs, of the rumor that King Philip is building a fleet. There is no school. Evening comes slowly. The animals are tied down, goats bleating softly, chickens settling on their perch. The hearth glows again, but dimly. There's not much wood left, save for the nights when the wind howls from the mountains. The sun sinks behind the ridges, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Dinner is the same as breakfast. There are no lights. And then, sleep. There is no ceremony to it, and far away, in a palace you'll never see. A boy your age is being tutored in Homer. His sandals are stitched with gold. That world is not yours. Yours is a world of dust, of calloused feet, of silent strength. And so, like everyone in your village, you sleep. Let us drift now, into the chambers of a boy not yet great. The place is Pella, the capital of Macedon, a small but rising kingdom in the northeastern edges of the Hellenic world. The land here is dry and stony in places, lush and green in others. Nestled between low mountains and valleys filled with wheat and olives, the sea is never too far. In 356 BCE, a year marked by omens, some say, the burning of the temple of Artemis at Ephesus. A fire so great that those who believed in portents whispered it must herald the birth of someone, immense. Nor is the hum of distant war, not yet crowned. His nursemaids bathe him with cool water from silver basins. He is dressed not in robes but in light tunics, with a short purple cloak. Even in childhood he is taught to be a prince of motion, not leisure, not yet known to the world by any title more grand than sun. The year is 349 BCE, but inside the palace, a structure built of timber and stone. With polished floors and decorated columns, things are quieter. Philip has transformed Macedonia from a tribal hill realm into a military power. Born a princess of Epirus, she arrives at Philip's court with her own gods, her own rituals. She walks barefoot in moonlight as she keeps sacred serpents in the palace. She speaks often of omens and destiny, of the blood of Achilles running in her son's veins, of Zeus himself having come to her in the form of a serpent. She is powerful, feared, and entirely unlike the other noble women of Macedonia. His legions are disciplined. His enemies are cautious. His allies are wary. He is a man of power and of appetite, both political and personal, almost hushed. Still, you are a young royal, perhaps a visiting child from a noble house, or a quiet servant boy carrying scrolls and water. Or perhaps you are Alexander himself, awake in the early light of day, curled beneath a linen sheet, the smell of beeswax and cedarwood oil drifting faintly through the air. The palace of Pella is not the grandest in the world, but to you it feels like a universe. Murals of lions and heroes adorn the walls. Clay tiles click softly under sandals. Distant voices echo through open courtyards. The coo of doves from the eaves mingles with the murmurs of philosophers in the shaded colonnades. Sunlight flickers across mosaic floors made from pebbles, crafted with such care that the very dust in their corners seems ancient. This is the world of Alexander, born just a few years before. His father is Philip II, king with a soldier's boots and a strategist's mind. His mother is Olympias, a queen of deeper mysteries. From the moment of his birth, Alexander is shaped by these two forces, his father's realism and his mother's myth. His days are not idle. He wakes early, often to the sound of flutes or the barked commands of soldiers training in the distance. From a young age, he is tested. He rides horses even before he is tall enough to mount them alone. He learns to wield a spear, not as play, but as preparation. The other boys give up. Even the grooms shake their heads. He is shown maps of lands far beyond his view, lands of Persia, of Scythia, of India. He learns to read Greek and speak in riddles. His tutors are strict, and discipline is daily. Among them is Leonidas, a Spartan-minded man who ensures the boys' meals are plain and his comfort rare. One morning, Alexander is shown a wild horse, untamable, or so it seems. The creature bucks and turns at every shadow. Alexander listens, not as a child listens, but as a student of fate. He imagines himself on distant shores, at the walls of Troy, speaking not in Greek, but in the language of myth. He corrects the cartographers. He reads Homer aloud, weeping over the fall of Hector, over the death of Patroclus. But Alexander watches the horse's eyes. He sees that it fears its own shadow. Quietly, he turns the horse toward the sun, so that the darkness falls behind them. And then he rides. So do his ambitions. Wine flows. A speech is made insinuating that Philip's new wife will bear him a pure Macedonian heir. Alexander, stung and seething, throws his cup. Philip lunges, stumbles, falls, and so do the tensions between father and son. The horse is Bucephalus, and it will carry him into legend. Even now, in boyhood, Alexander is different, curious, fierce. The reasons are murky. Love, vengeance, conspiracy. It is said Olympias smiled at the news. His presence unsettles some, inspires others. His sandals damp with morning dew. Out! Damp with mop, but with scrolls. His voice is soft, his logic sharp. He teaches Alexander not just to fight, but to think, to question the stars, to examine justice, to seek telos, a Greek word for purpose or fulfillment. At feasts, he listens to the debates of generals. Water trickles from carved stone basins. The boys, Alexander, and other noble sons like Hephaestion, Ptolemy, and Cassander, sit on low benches, listening, debating, imagining the structure of the cosmos, the gardens. He questions priests and poets alike. At night, Olympias whispers stories to him of gods and heroes, of Achilles, his supposed ancestor. When he is 13, a change comes. His father calls upon Aristotle, the great philosopher, to become Alexander's personal tutor. Their lessons take place in a quiet grove in Mysa, under the filtered light of cypress and plane trees. Cicadas drone in the background. Alexander learns of Asia, of the limits of Greek understanding, of the philosophers of India and Babylon. He draws his own maps. He begins to see the world not only as it is, but as it might be under his rule. There is another lesson he learns, too, quietly, through the slow erosion of family bonds. Philip's power grows at a wedding. Philip VII, perhaps. Tempers flare. Alexander and Olympias retreat to Epirus, but history does not linger. In 336 BCE, Philip is murdered by a bodyguard at the theater during a festival. Alexander returns. At 20 years old, he is declared king, crowned beneath a sky thick with clouds, the air still scented with burnt offerings, and so ends the childhood of a prince, and begins the march of an empire. The year is 336 BCE, and the world has shifted. The king is dead. Long live the king. You are now standing in the cool dawn air of Asia, where the stones of the ancient theater still echo with the cries of that terrible day. The scent of laurel and spilled wine lingers in the dust. Philip II, triumphant general and ambitious reformer, remains a kingdom stitched together by loyalty, fear, and opportunity. Alexander's claim is not uncontested. His youth invites doubt. His mother, Olympias, is feared by many. And there are whispers of rebellion. He's been struck down by one of his own men. His blood darkened the marble steps, and his body was carried away in silence. And so, at the age of just 20, Alexander ascends the throne. But this is no secure inheritance. Macedon, though growing in strength, but Alexander does not pause. The terrain is rough and mountainous, the air colder, thinner. Villages cling to cliffs like moss on stone. The local chieftains believe the new king will be cautious, untested. He moves swiftly, decisively, as though the throne were only a stepping stone to something greater. By the time they reach Thebes, the city is not prepared. He first turns to consolidate power. In the palaces, Olympias acts ruthlessly. Macedon is not weakened. Its king is not soft. He is now undisputed ruler of all Greece and commander of the united Greek armies. A coalition in name, Macedonian in reality. He turns his eyes to the east. The city is sacked. The homes are leveled. The people sold, scattered, slain. Only temples and the house of a famous poet are spared. The one mighty Persian Empire, stretching from the shores of the Aegean to the mountains of India. Ruled by King Darius III, a man Alexander has not yet met, but already considers his rival. Rivals to the throne, including Philip's other wives and their children, vanish. Some are sent away. Others are not seen again. Alexander says little, but his silence speaks volumes. But the crossing feels profound. The Persians line the opposite bank, confident in their position. The river is swift, the bank steep, and Alexander must attack uphill. The fighting is fierce but brief. The Persians break. The satraps scatter. The road into Asia lies open, and installs Macedonian governors with Greek advisors. His approach is strategic, not only military, but psychological. He does not merely conquer territory, he absorbs it. As he steps onto Asian soil, he is no longer merely a Macedonian king. He is something else, a conqueror. Others resist and are subdued. His reputation begins to grow, an heir to myth, a challenger to empire. He rides north to the tribes of Thrace and Illyria, where murmurs of independence grow. The scent of summer dust rising from the road ahead. There, on the coast of Anatolia, Alexander walks slowly among the scattered stones. The waves crash softly below. He offers sacrifices to Athena, protector of heroes. They carry long spears, known as ceresis, and wear bronze helmets that gleam dully in the sun. Their steps are rhythmic. The king who rides at the front, and who never seems to tire, Darius is watching, waiting. Their trust in their young leader is growing. He lays a wreath at the supposed tomb of Achilles, his idol, his imagined ancestor. His soldiers see him fight with ferocity, not with recklessness, but with a kind of sharp, calm purpose. He is not his father, but he is every bit as commanding. Through cities and tombs, two places no Greek king has ever seen. Victories come swiftly, and the borders are quieted. They are wrong. Alexander leads from the front, but then news from the south. The Greek city of Thebes has risen in revolt, encouraged by rumors of Alexander's death and weary of Macedonian dominance. Theban leaders call their citizens to arms. They believe the young king will hesitate. They believe Athens may join them. Instead, Alexander marches his army hundreds of miles in just 2 weeks. The ground is hard beneath their sandals. Summer dust clings to their cloaks. What follows is swift and brutal. The walls fall. The message is unmistakable. The rest of Greece, even proud Athens, falls silent, and so Alexander secures his base. To Asia, to the lands his father long dreamed of conquering. But before he crosses the sea, he makes a symbolic gesture. He visits Troy, the legendary city of Homer's epics, long ruined, its foundations half buried in windswept soil. He is said to whisper, "Happy are you, Achilles, for you found a faithful friend in life and a glorious bard after death." And then, in 334 BCE, Alexander leads his army across the Hellespont. The sea is narrow here. His army is not vast, roughly 40,000 men, many hardened from campaigns in the north. Their first test comes quickly. At the river Granicus, near the coast of Asia Minor, Persian satraps, local governors, have assembled an army to repel the invaders. He does so without hesitation. Leading the charge himself, Alexander crosses the river under a hail of arrows. Horses plunge through the current. Swords clash in the water. What follows is a series of liberations or conquests, depending on who tells the tale. The Greek cities along the western coast, Ephesus, Miletus, Halicarnassus, open their gates. Some welcome Alexander as a liberator from Persian rule, but this is no rapid campaign. Alexander pauses often, to found cities, to offer sacrifices, to consult oracles. He restores temples, pays respects to local customs. In the evenings, around campfires, his men begin to speak of him differently. He is no longer just the son of Philip. He is Alexander, favored by the gods. The youth who tames horses and quotes Homer, still the heart of Persia remains untouched. And Alexander is not done, not even close. He has only just begun the long march eastward, a march that will take him across deserts and rivers, but for now, he stands on the soil of Asia, the wind tugging at his cloak, and he marches on. You are tired. Not the kind of tired that fades with rest, but the deep fatigue of long marches under a burning sun, of sleeping in dust with your spear across your chest, of eating hard bread with cracked teeth. A Macedonian by birth, but reshaped by years of conquest. It is the year 331 BCE, and for 3 long years your army has pushed east, deeper into the vast Persian Empire. You are one of Alexander's men now. You have seen cities burn, you have crossed rivers whose names you've forgotten. And always, you have marched behind a man who seems less like a king and more like a force of nature. Around you, men murmur softly, sharpening blades or muttering prayers. Somewhere nearby, horses shift restlessly, their nostrils steaming in the cool night. Fires flicker low. The ground beneath your blanket is hard and dry. The plains here are unnaturally flat, a perfect stage for what is to come. The Persians have prepared it themselves. The Macedonian ranks form quickly, practiced, steady, each man knowing his place. Ancient chroniclers claimed hundreds of thousands, a number likely exaggerated, but still, they are many. Their line is wide, small at first, subtle. A trap, a quiet rhythm to which only one man knows the steps. Alexander begins to shift his troops to the right. It is not a charge, not a provocation, merely a drift. Their banners ripple in the morning wind. There are elephants, scythed chariots, bodies slamming against one another in tight, brutal formation. He hesitates. Then, once again, he flees, his chariot turning sharply, vanishing into the dust behind the lines. The King of Kings, lost in panic. The Persian scythed chariots rush forward, blades spinning, but many are turned aside, neutralized by agile javelin men and well-timed dodges. The terrain, it turns out, has betrayed the Persians. Too flat, too predictable. Alexander has studied it well. Others hesitate, Many simply collapse. The battle is now truly over. The chain of command unravels in seconds, and the motionless bodies of men who followed their kings to this place and did not return. There is a kind of hush to it all, broken only by soft commands and the shuffling of exhausted feet. Cavalry in shining mail that reflects the light like river water. Somewhere in the center sits Darius III, atop a golden chariot, surrounded by royal guards. Behind them, the phalanx advances, shields locked. The Persian Empire is no longer his enemy. It is now becoming part of his vision, absorbed into his identity. Sarsis, those impossibly long spears, leveled straight ahead, clearing stones and leveling ridges so their war chariots can thunder freely across the earth. Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis will soon open their gates to Alexander without a fight. Alexander? Short, bright-eyed, impossible to predict. On the left flank, Alexander's aging general Parmenion is under pressure. Persian cavalry has broken through in places, and the Macedonian line begins to buckle. You followed him through storms and sieges, across plains and deserts. Some call him blessed by the gods. Others whisper that he has already become one. But tonight, there is something different in the air. You are camped near Gaugamela. You try to sleep, but rest is shallow. Above the stars wheel in slow silence. He has a choice. Chase the fleeing king and seal the Persian defeat once and for all, or turn back and save his men. It is said that Alexander sleeps soundly tonight. He always does before battle. He trusts in fate. Or perhaps he has shaped his own so thoroughly that he no longer feels fear. By dawn, the army is awake. The first light of morning bleeds across the horizon, washing the plain in a pale gold haze. Ahead of you, the Persian host stretches across the field like a great wall, is here to reclaim his dignity, to crush the upstart Macedonian who dares to call himself king in Persian lands. And yet the field remains silent. Then a movement. The Persian line begins to stretch in response, uncertain. You are watching something invisible being woven in front of you. A pattern, suddenly, a signal, a cry, the horns sound. The Macedonian cavalry charges not toward the Persian line head-on, but diagonally, a sharp wedge forming under Alexander's personal command. You feel the earth shudder beneath your feet. The clash is enormous, a cacophony of metal and shouts. Then comes the moment of fracture. As the wedge drives forward, it punches a hole directly toward Darius. The Persian king sees it coming. The Persian army watches this in disbelief. Some resist, but elsewhere, there is still danger. Alexander hears the call for help. He chooses loyalty. Alexander redirects his forces, bolstering Parmenion's line. It is not a glamorous move, but it is decisive. The Persians are pushed back, but the field remains quiet. Afterward, the plain is littered with the remnants of war. Bent spears, torn banners, empty boots. You walk among the aftermath. The air is still. Carrion birds circle in the sky, keeping their distance for now. The victory is total. Gaugamela has fallen, and yet something in him is changing. This was not just a military triumph. It was a claim, not just to land, but to legacy. He will no longer fight as a Greek avenger. He will rule as a king of the East. From here, the road winds on, deeper into mystery, ambition, and myth. But on this plain, beneath a quiet morning sky, the world turned. Silently, irrevocably. The path to Persepolis is not one of thunderous battle cries or flaming sieges. Now, by the time Alexander approaches the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire, much of the resistance has already crumbled. The ground beneath your sandals is no longer thick with mud from hasty trenches or scarred by hooves and wheels. The mountains of southern Persia rise like ancient sentinels, quiet and indifferent. The sky overhead is a pale blue canvas, uninterrupted by cloud or shadow, and the air carries the slow fragrance of cedar, dust, and crushed herbs. The scent of an empire no longer defiant, but waiting. And then you see it. Not at first, only a shimmer. Their expressions eternally serene. In this city of ritual, time stands still. A trick of the heat, perhaps. But as the hours pass, as your horse plods slowly forward, he speaks with priests and Persian scribes. He visits the fire temples, where the sacred flames, said to be eternal, flicker quietly behind curtains of incense smoke. He appoints satraps from both Macedonian and Persian nobility. Not entirely. He is absorbing, reframing, reimagining empire as something transcultural, not just the spoils of war, but a fusion of civilizations. He dons, at times, the flowing garments of the Eastern court. His beard remains trimmed, but his posture shifts. Straighter, more regal, more deliberate. There is no siege. The city opens to him, and he walks its halls, not as an invader, but as something more complicated. A conqueror cloaked in curiosity. He does not sack the temples, does not desecrate the altars. They remember a boy raised in Pella speaking Greek, training in armor, eating with his soldiers. When the flames had smoldered down to smoke and ash and stood silently among the ruins, others say it was a symbol, a deliberate severing of past from future. The stone floors are scorched, the carved lions blackened. The scent of incense has been replaced by the ghost of fire. But even in ruin, the bones of Persepolis remain. Its gates still stand, its terraces intact, its legacy unchanged. Message to the world. The old empire is gone. A new one has begun. Now he walks among eunuchs and court dancers, speaks through interpreters, and listens to astrologers. Instead, he watches. Perhaps, in this light, the burning of Persepolis was less an act of vengeance and more a ritual of rebirth. The wine is strong. That absorbs rather than erases. Someone hands Alexander a torch, the subtle flicker of torchlight against gilded walls. A woman, a Greek courtesan named Thais, stands near the center, laughing perhaps too loudly. In her voice, a challenge, he learns. The haze parts to reveal something that seems more imagined than real. Columns taller than any tree you've seen. A flicker across the floor, crawling along the base of a curtain. But then the dry wood catches, and the blaze leaps upward. The cedar roof beams, dried for decades, explode in fire. Gold and lapis shimmer as they melt. The smoke thickens, dark and hot, curling through the night air as figures flee down the long steps of the palace terraces. A place filled with cedar beams, golden vessels, carved thrones, and polished stone. Staircases carved into the face of the mountain. Gateways larger than ships, flanked by statues of beasts with wings and ancient crowns. This is Persepolis, the city of ceremony, the spiritual citadel of the Achaemenid kings. To call it merely a capital is to misunderstand it. Persepolis was not built to be lived in, but to be revered. It was not a home, but a ritual, frozen in stone and ceremony. It held no markets, no raucous forums, no common neighborhoods. It was a place for procession, for tribute, for symbolic gatherings beneath the eyes of kings and gods. When Alexander enters its gates, it is not with force. You walk beside him, figuratively, silently, through corridors lined with carvings. Hundreds of figures carved into the stone in long, patient rows. They are not soldiers, but envoys, each from a different corner of the empire, bringing tribute to the king. See the Elamites with their tall caps and looped beards, the Medes in flowing robes, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, all captured in profile, bearing gifts of ivory, gold, textiles, and animals. Their feet are forever lifted in mid-step. Alexander spends many weeks here, possibly months. He is not idle. He studies the city's layout. To his followers, especially the older Macedonian officers, this transformation is unsettling. They murmur in their camps and courtyard meetings, and yet Alexander is not becoming Persian. And then, the fire. It happens, the sources say, during a banquet, one of many held in the grand halls of the palace of Xerxes. Evening begins, as most do, with wine poured liberally into metal goblets. Music from flutes and lyres. Burn it, she says. Burn the palace. Avenge Athens. The suggestion, meant half in jest and half in bitterness, echoes in the hall like a dare. It is late. The air is warm. Whether he hesitates, no one can say for sure. But eventually, the torch is thrown, and the flames begin. At first it is slow. Alexander watches, perhaps stunned, or perhaps certain. Some sources say he regretted it immediately, that he rode back to the palace in the early morning. You walk the ruins with him. The palace is quiet now. The Persians once believed that fire was a cleansing force, sacred, not destructive. For Alexander, it marks a turning. After Persepolis, his ambitions seemed less about territory and more about something internal, a vision of empire that binds rather than divides. The road ahead will be harder, stranger, more uncertain. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of flame, the empire stands on a threshold. One world has ended, another is just beginning. He has already conquered the Persian Empire. Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, all his. He has titles, wealth, temples bearing his name, but that, it seems, is not enough. For Alexander, geography is not merely terrain, it is a mirror, a test. When the path narrows to the width of a man's shoulders, in places, they must build steps into the ice using picks and hatchets. When animals fall, they do not cry out, they vanish. Slip, a slide, a fading clatter of hooves on stone. And then, nothing. They are suggestions. Weathered trails once used by traders or mountain tribes, half buried in snow, swept by avalanches, and haunted by silence. A kind of sacred challenge. If the world has an edge, he must touch it. Fear of Alexander, whose eyes are clear and unwavering even in the storm. Or perhaps it is something more subtle. The slow realization that this is no longer a campaign, but a pilgrimage. Strange one, yes, but sacred in its persistence. If there is a river the Persians have never crossed, he will cross it. Not just a geographical one, but a psychological one. The world behind them, Persia, Macedonia, the Mediterranean, seems smaller now, dimmer, less immediate. Wild goats watching from ledges still as statues, as the lush, contested heartland of the Far East. Trees return, streams thicken into rivers. Smoke rises from distant villages. Life begins again. He marries a local noblewoman, Roxana, in Bactria. Some say it is love. Others call it strategy. Likely it is both. Birds that glide on wind currents without ever flapping their wings. In the quiet moments, you can hear water trickling from glaciers, the beginning of rivers that will one day feed entire civilizations. If the sun rises somewhere east of any map he owns, then he will follow it. And so, the Hindu Kush must be crossed. The passes are not roads. The men march in single file. Sometimes they are forced to crawl on hands and knees. But the scenery, if you allow yourself to look up, is unlike anything the men from Macedonia or Greece have ever known. Endless peaks, not blue like the mountains back home, but white, silver, even golden where the sun strikes them. Valleys hidden in cloud. The army splits to make passage easier. Nosebleeds, dizziness, confusion. Soldiers begin to hallucinate. Fireside tales grow darker. Some whisper of being cursed. Others say they've seen gods or heard voices on the wind. Alexander himself takes the Kowak Pass, likely guided by local hill peoples. Men who walk barefoot. One morning, the sky grays, and by nightfall, the ground is buried in white. Blankets freeze, stiff. Spears and armor become cold to the touch, metal biting through leather gloves. The army wraps its weapons in cloth and lights fires even during the march. With calloused feet and eyes that seem to know the stones by name, here, altitude sickness sets in. And then, the snow. It comes swiftly, silently, but they do not turn back. Why? Perhaps it is fear. Eventually, after weeks of climbing, the descent begins. The path leads down through high alpine meadows, patches of green softened by snowfall, and into the valleys of Bactria, and yet something in the men has changed. They have crossed a threshold. They have walked through the sky and survived, and Alexander says little. But his pace does not slow, begins founding new cities again. Alexandria is scattered like breadcrumbs across the land, but always his eyes are eastward. Always he walks just a little ahead. Now, the soft golden deserts of Persia lie behind. The air grows thinner, the sunlight sharper, and the horizon no longer stretches wide but climbs high, jagged and bone-pale, like a row of shattered teeth piercing the sky. You are walking slowly, heavily, in the shadow of the Hindu Kush, one of the world's highest and most treacherous mountain ranges. It is the year 329 BCE, and Alexander has turned his gaze eastward. Past the known cities of the empire, toward lands spoken of only in myth, lands of snow leopards and hidden rivers, lands where the sky hangs low and the people do not fear kings. For weeks now, the army has been climbing. The trail is narrow, often no more than a ribbon of rock clinging to the mountainside. On one side, a steep drop into misty chasms. On the other, cliffs that loom like the walls of a fortress. The wind is relentless. It carries not only the cold, sharp, and raw, but the sound of loose stones skittering down unseen slopes. You draw your cloak tighter. The horses are thinner now. The oxen falter. Even the pack mules struggle for footing. Men walk with heads bowed, breath visible in the air, lips cracked and fingers numbed. The firewood gathered below no longer burns easily at this altitude. The flames sputter and food takes longer to cook. Smoke lingers in camp, clinging to wool and hair. Sleep is restless, and dreams are strange. And still, Alexander pushes forward. Why? He has already conquered the Persian Empire. Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, all his. He has titles, wealth, temples bearing his name, but that, it seems, is not enough. For Alexander, geography is not merely terrain, it is a mirror, a test. When the path narrows to the width of a man's shoulders, in places, they must build steps into the ice using picks and hatchets. When animals fall, they do not cry out, they vanish. Slip, a slide, a fading clatter of hooves on stone. And then, nothing. They are suggestions. Weathered trails once used by traders or mountain tribes, half buried in snow, swept by avalanches, and haunted by silence. A kind of sacred challenge. If the world has an edge, he must touch it. Fear of Alexander, whose eyes are clear and unwavering even in the storm. Or perhaps it is something more subtle. The slow realization that this is no longer a campaign, but a pilgrimage. Strange one, yes, but sacred in its persistence. If there is a river the Persians have never crossed, he will cross it. Not just a geographical one, but a psychological one. The world behind them, Persia, Macedonia, the Mediterranean, seems smaller now, dimmer, less immediate. Wild goats watching from ledges still as statues, as the lush, contested heartland of the Far East. Trees return, streams thicken into rivers. Smoke rises from distant villages. Life begins again. He marries a local noblewoman, Roxana, in Bactria. Some say it is love. Others call it strategy. Likely it is both. Birds that glide on wind currents without ever flapping their wings. In the quiet moments, you can hear water trickling from glaciers, the beginning of rivers that will one day feed entire civilizations. If the sun rises somewhere east of any map he owns, then he will follow it. And so, the Hindu Kush must be crossed. The passes are not roads. The men march in single file. Sometimes they are forced to crawl on hands and knees. But the scenery, if you allow yourself to look up, is unlike anything the men from Macedonia or Greece have ever known. Endless peaks, not blue like the mountains back home, but white, silver, even golden where the sun strikes them. Valleys hidden in cloud. The army splits to make passage easier. Nosebleeds, dizziness, confusion. Soldiers begin to hallucinate. Fireside tales grow darker. Some whisper of being cursed. Others say they've seen gods or heard voices on the wind. Alexander himself takes the Kowak Pass, likely guided by local hill peoples. Men who walk barefoot. One morning, the sky grays, and by nightfall, the ground is buried in white. Blankets freeze, stiff. Spears and armor become cold to the touch, metal biting through leather gloves. The army wraps its weapons in cloth and lights fires even during the march. With calloused feet and eyes that seem to know the stones by name, here, altitude sickness sets in. And then, the snow. It comes swiftly, silently, but they do not turn back. Why? Perhaps it is fear. Eventually, after weeks of climbing, the descent begins. The path leads down through high alpine meadows, patches of green softened by snowfall, and into the valleys of Bactria, and yet something in the men has changed. They have crossed a threshold. They have walked through the sky and survived, and Alexander says little. But his pace does not slow. He begins founding new cities again. Alexandria is scattered like breadcrumbs across the land. But always his eyes are eastward. Always he walks just a little ahead. By now, Alexander has become more than a king. He is a legend, carried on camel caravans, whispered about in desert markets, carved into stone tablets in distant lands. Some call him the new pharaoh, others the son of Zeus, and yet others simply the foreign storm, a force of nature passing through lands that never expected to meet such a man. But now he has crossed into a world unlike anything he or his army has ever seen. India. The gods here are older than your stories. Many-armed, elephant-headed, carved from black stone and washed daily in milk and ghee. It's not yet a single country, but a tapestry of kingdoms, rivers, cities, and deep-rooted traditions. The air is warmer again, moist with the scent of river mud and flowering trees. He questions the sages, sometimes for hours, sitting in the heat beneath wide trees. He sends messengers to local courts, negotiates with kings, and eventually meets King Porus, a ruler of the Porava kingdom, proud and unyielding. The land is greener, buzzing with insects, pulsing with the slow rhythm of monsoon-fed life. You can feel the difference the moment you descend into the Indus Valley. The people dress in bright colors, temples look east instead of west. Alexander has arrived not just in a new land, but in a new cosmic order. When brought before Alexander in chains, Porus does not grovel. Elephants, half-shrouded in fog, sway like ghost ships in the distance. The soldiers, unused to these creatures, feel unease in their stomachs. Even the horses shift nervously. But the battle, when it comes, is brief compared to the stories that will follow it. He is no longer the tallest shadow. Here, Brahmins debate him with calm voices and steady eyes. This moment, strange, calm, and noble, will echo across the centuries. A quiet testament to the meeting of two great minds across a river. They tell him that life is a cycle, birth, death, rebirth, and that conquest is merely an illusion. They speak of dharma, karma, and moksha, of selflessness and inward vision, of fire in the belly and silence in the mind. He cannot stop now. More kingdoms, vast rivers. They speak of their wives, their children, their farms back in Pella or Thebes. They have marched across deserts, crossed mountains, and now stand face to face with a rainforest where even the air feels heavy with the unknown. Forests where tigers walk beneath banyan trees, and, perhaps, the end of the world. The place where the earth meets the sky, the mouth of the ocean that encircles everything. You are tired, and this is not a story of war. It speaks of glory, of maps, unfinished, of the edge of the world, just within reach. But his men do not move. They are not afraid, only full. Their hunger for conquest has been sated. That ambition must, at some point, bow to the rhythms of life. Alexander listens. Perhaps he does not understand all the words, but he senses the weight of them. The depth of this land's spiritual gravity. What follows is the battle of the Hydaspes River. Then he turns his gaze westward. For the first time in years, act. But we won't linger on tactics or blood. Instead, imagine the river itself, swollen and brown from rain, wide enough to swallow sound. It is early morning. The mist rises. Alexander wins. But he is impressed deeply by Porus, who fights with quiet majesty, riding his elephant until the very end. Instead, he is asked, "How would you wish to be treated?" And he replies, calmly, like a king. Alexander smiles and honors him. Porus is restored to his throne, made an ally, perhaps even a friend. But Alexander is not done. He asks the locals, "What lies east of here?" The answer is both tantalizing and vague. Alexander is intrigued. He has chased the horizon his entire life. But his men are weary. They miss their homes. They begin to murmur. Then they plead. Finally, they refuse. At the Hyphasis River, Alexander's army mutinies, gently but firmly. They will go no further. He tries to persuade them. And so, at the banks of this river, in the soft, humid light of what is now Punjab, Alexander weeps. Not in anger, not in weakness, but in acceptance. That even he, the great, the unconquered, is not beyond the pull of human limitation. He builds 12 altars to the gods, vast and solemn, marking the edge of his empire. His journey home will not be easy, but it has begun. And behind him, the land breathes on, endlessly alive, indifferent, eternal. The wind does not greet you here. It brushes past, indifferent. Grainy and dry, it carries no song of birds, no scent of orchards or morning fires, just dust, endless dust, and a silence so wide it stretches beyond hearing. You stand now on the edge of the Jedrosian Desert. It is not an edge in the sense of a border, but a cliff of experience, dividing the world of the known from something elemental and quiet, like a void filled with light and heat. This is how Alexander's army returned from the east, not with parades, not on gilded ships, but through the most feared wasteland in all of Asia. Even the Persians had avoided it. Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had once tried to cross it. His army withered. Paths disappeared into dust. Wells were found dry. Carts splintered under the weight of water barrels. Camels, burdened with weeks of supplies, refused to rise in the morning. The sand turned white under the sun, blinding. Sky bleached itself of clouds. Shade vanished. Nights were no longer a respite, only cold. And yet here was Alexander, at the height of his conquests, choosing the same path. No one stopped him. Not his generals. The men set out with camels, wagons, supplies, barrels of water, sacks of dates and barley, bales of dried meat and figs. They kept to ancient caravan routes. The guides. Locals who had survived these crossings murmured about salt flats and hidden wells, not as soldiers. Perhaps they were too tired to protest, or perhaps they had come to believe that the young king, touched by gods and ghosts, could walk through anything. But the desert was not impressed. It began, not with catastrophe, but with slow forgetting. The first days were deceptively gentle, sun warm, the sands manageable, but then the rains failed. The monsoon, which had been expected to wet the desert, did not come, and the desert began to change its shape. By the third week, men began to fall. First the weak, then the strong, not from battle wounds, but from dehydration. From the slow collapse of the body when sweat no longer cools, when lips split open like dry clay, and when thoughts become distant echoes. They dropped their armor. They claimed to see lakes on the horizon, blue and cool and shimmering. They ran toward them. Others dug frantically into the ground, hoping to find hidden springs, only to collapse from exhaustion. Officers wept openly. Veterans of the siege of Gaza begged to be left behind. Horses foamed at the mouth and died standing. Whole supply caravans were lost to sandstorms. Violent, perhaps apocryphal, but it has lingered for centuries. A moment of shared deprivation of sovereignty by suffering. Short-lived whirlwinds that stripped flesh and scattered packs across miles. Their swords, where there were no landmarks, no trees, no villages, just dunes and rocks and heat. Every footstep was a question. Would the next one come? Every morning the army awoke smaller. Men buried comrades in shallow graves that the wind erased within hours. They began to speak less, voices cracked. The men wept, not with joy, but with sheer exhaustion. Food was found, wells dug, carts reassembled. The energy of conquest had turned to silence. The fire that had once burned in Alexander's eyes now flickered, not out, but inward. Bodies counted. Songs faded. Laughter died. Even their clothing, peeling it away in desperation, trying to escape the air itself, toward Babylon. But it did not feel like a return. It felt like a migration of shadows, a dream walking toward its own dissolution. Alexander walked among them. He did not ride, did not cover himself in gold or silk. Most chroniclers focused on his battles, not his marches. But the few fragments that remain describe something more haunting than war, an empire unraveling. Not through rebellion or politics, but through sun and silence. His cloak was caked with dust, found a helmet full of water, and offered it to him. The king looked at it, then looked at the men watching him. He lifted the helmet, poured it out slowly into the sand, his boots torn, his once polished cuirass left behind. Part of it followed the coast, searching for water. Part of it stayed inland, He himself led a group into the heart of the desert, perhaps hoping to find a shorter route, or perhaps simply to prove something, to himself or to the ghosts that walked with him. The man who had crossed the Hindu Kush, who had stormed the gates of Tyre, now moved through the heat like a pilgrim, silent eyes lowered. The stories from this time are few. Some men went mad, and still they walked. Alexander divided the army. It was during these weeks that a story began to circulate. Soldier, seeing Alexander near collapse, "If my men cannot drink," he said, "then neither shall I." It is a quiet tale. They marched for 60 days. 60 days in a place where time itself seemed to stretch, where 1 hour felt like 3. In the evenings, Alexander looked to the west. He was moving homeward, yes, toward Persia. Finally, they reached the Macron coast. The waters of the Arabian Sea lapped at the shore. The salt air stung their cracked skin. Of the tens of thousands who began the march, a quarter were gone. Gone not in war, but in sand. And though the empire still stretched across continents, from the Nile to the Indus, it was clear that something had changed. He had survived the desert, but not unchanged, which was not a victory. It was an echo of mortality, soft, persistent, and final. The winds that swept through Babylon in early June were not unfamiliar. They moved slowly over sun-hardened earth, rattled palm fronds along the canals, and stirred dust along the wide boulevards lined with merchants, soldiers, and stray dogs. But this time, in 323 BCE, his entrance was different. Not triumphant, not ceremonial. It was slow. And with each new conquest, something inside him had shifted, least of all perhaps Alexander himself. He no longer merely chased victory. He chased something unreachable. Delegates from every corner of the empire arrived with petitions, offerings, and rumors. Plans were laid for new campaigns. To Arabia, some said, or to rebuild the western frontier. He reviewed shipbuilders, reassigned satraps, attended religious rites, a dream of unity. His appetite had dulled, as if searching for some constellation only he could see. His once bright gaze became distant. He no longer rode as far. He drank more heavily, thick wine from silver cups, mixed with honey and herbs. The wine was strong, and often the banquets grew loud. Yet those close to him noticed his silences grew longer, each offering different remedies: cool compresses, infused herbs, incantations, and ritual sacrifice. His only son, Alexander IV, was unborn, carried by his Bactrian wife Roxana. His half-brother Aretas was of limited mental capacity. A later tale tells of his generals crowding his bed, asking, "To whom do you leave the empire?" And that Alexander, through cracked lips, whispered, "To the strongest." There he sat propped upright as his soldiers passed by him in silence, while a world built in his name began to slip away. Each man allowed one final glance at the leader who had brought them to the edges of the known world. The commander's men, like Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, and Perdiccas, looked at each other with wary eyes. The unity forged by one man's charisma now seemed to hang by a fraying thread. Some applied salves to his feet, believing the heat rose from the ground. Others sought to bleed the illness from him. All were met with failure, of legacy, of divinity, almost hesitant. Boats glided through canals, vendors shouted in the marketplaces, children played with clay animals in the dust. But inside the palace walls, the mood thickened. His generals hovered, each caught between grief and calculation. Who would rule next? What would become of the empire? As always with Alexander, history becomes fog at the edges. This was not a city he planned to leave behind. This time Babylon was a place to rest. Others say the fever came on gradually, creeping into his limbs and clouding his vision. There are reports of pain in his belly, of chills, of strange dreams, of moments of lucidity, followed by long hours of silence. He issued commands in faint whispers. Sometimes he drifted into sleep for hours, only to wake in confusion. At other times, he was alert and even charming, asking after friends and plans. He spoke of a voyage to Arabia, of ships being prepared. The city, even in its twilight centuries, pulsed with quiet life. There were potters and scribes, priests and entertainers. His body sweated, and the fever remained. Couriers rushing with sealed scrolls, women selling dates and beer made from barley and honey. Above them loomed the city's old bones, ziggurats from long-gone dynasties, brick walls scorched by time and weather, drifting from battlefield to battlefield like a wind with no direction but forward. He had crossed the Hellespont, battled Persians, subdued Egyptian priests, and crowned himself in the ruins of Persepolis. He had climbed the Zagros Mountains, marched through burning deserts, lost friends to thirst, and watched his soldiers bleed into the soil of distant lands. He had reached the Indus River, turned back under protest, and journeyed west again, through parched lands where men perished by the thousands, temples still blackened from fires set during older wars. Alexander the Great arrived in Babylon not as a stranger, but as a conqueror who had claimed the city more than once. He was 32 years old. Once the capital of mighty kings Hammurabi, Nebuchadnezzar, it now belonged to memory more than power. But it suited his purposes. The palace was large, cool, and dotted with fragrant gardens. The city was ancient, respected, strategically placed at the crossroads of Asia, and weary. For over a decade, he had lived on horseback, in saddle and sand. He had built cities, more than 20 of them bearing his name, and crushed others into rubble. No one could say for certain. Babylon was a strange place to stop. Here, for the first time in many months, Alexander was still. He held court. But underneath the surface, something had changed. Some nights he stared at the stars, the very stars Aristotle had once named for him, with a vacant look. And then, during a banquet in early June, he fell ill. The accounts vary wildly. Some say he collapsed after drinking from a large cup at a feast held in honor of a fallen officer. The physicians, many and varied, came to his bedside. Alexander withered. He could no longer rise, but his voice grew weak. The palace grew silent. Outside, Babylon continued as it always had. Alexander had no clear heir. There are stories, so many stories about his final hours. One claims he handed his signet ring to Perdiccas with trembling fingers. Another says he spoke no final words at all. Still others say he had already lost the power of speech by then. A more haunting account says that in his final day he asked to be carried from his chamber into the palace courtyard. Whether true or not, the image lingers. A thin man, sweat-drenched, staring at his army through fever-clouded eyes. Alexander died on the evening of June 11th, 323 BCE. There was no thunderclap, no celestial omen, just the gradual fading of a man who had outrun time. And what followed was chaos. Some wanted to wait until Roxana gave birth. Others wanted to divide the empire immediately. Soldiers grumbled, unsure who to follow. In distant satrapies, local rulers began to make their own plans. The once cohesive empire began to shiver, fracture, and prepare for war. The generals argued. The funeral procession, meant to carry him to Macedonia, was intercepted, where his body was rerouted to Egypt, where he had been declared the son of Ammon. But what of his body? That, too, became a mystery. Some claim he was embalmed using secret techniques brought from Egypt. Others say his body did not decay at all. A sign, it was said, of his divine nature. Stories spread that he lay in state for days, his features unchanged, his skin still smooth. Eventually, a golden sarcophagus was fashioned. But even his final resting place became a subject of dispute. Where he ended up, no one knows for certain. Alexandria, Siwa, beneath some lost ruin. The mystery persists to this day. The empire had lost its center, to be picked up by poets, prophets, kings, and historians for centuries to come. And though his generals would fight for decades over his territory, none could ever replace the man himself, the singular force who had held together cultures, armies, and dreams. Alexander left behind not only a broken map, but a broken myth, one whose pieces would scatter across history and in the quiet rooms of Babylon, where once he breathed only the wind remained. Imagine a candle sputtering at the end of a long vigil, its light soft and golden, flickering in a wide chamber of carved stone. You are standing in a place that once trembled with power, a palace without a king, an empire without its heartbeat. The year is 323 BCE, and Alexander is dead. Nor did he meet his end by enemy blade or palace intrigue, at least, not directly. Instead, he died slowly in fever in Babylon at the age of just 32. His only son, Alexander IV, was still in the womb of his Bactrian queen, Roxana. His half-brother, Aretas, was mentally impaired and unfit for leadership in the eyes of the generals. There was no successor to wear the great general's armor, to sit his throne, or to dream with the same terrifying ambition. A man who had ridden thousands of miles on horseback, who had seen the ends of rivers and deserts and strange stars, was finally still. He did not fall on the battlefield, as many had assumed he would, but the world he created, stitched together with war and vision, did not remain still for long. Alexander left behind no clear heir. Instead, there was a vacuum. Ptolemy took the body as a political and spiritual prize, then later entombed in Alexandria, the city that bore his name. Pilgrims would travel to see it. Emperors, centuries later, would claim to have visited it, but eventually, ... Even the tomb was lost, swallowed by time or hidden by war. For whoever held Alexander's remains could claim a piece of his legacy. And as history so often shows us, vacuums do not last. His rule would stretch deep into lands Alexander had passed through in a blur of conquest. Tried to reunify the empire under his own name, but found only resistance and eventual death. Cassander, cold and calculating, seized Macedonia itself. He imprisoned and murdered Roxana and the young Alexander IV, snuffing out the bloodline before it could take root.
Nice.
The Seleucid Empire would carry forward Greek culture into the east. A strange hybrid of old Persian courtliness and Macedonian ambition. You could picture the aftermath like a once bright tapestry, slowly unraveling under pressure. First, quiet discussions among his generals, known as the Diadochi, or successors. The slicing of an empire too large for one hand. Men like Ptolemy, Seleucus, Cassander, and Antigonus. Coins with his profile minted long after his death. Statues with his likeness in distant museums. His dream of cultural fusion, however flawed, seeded generations of exchange and connection. Others say it was lost to flood, or moved secretly by Roman hands. A few even claim it lies outside Egypt altogether, waiting quietly beneath layers of earth, near Siwa, or in distant sands. Each of whom had marched at his side for years, sharing bread and danger in equal measure. He seized Egypt, claiming it not with arrogance but with subtle calculation. Egypt had always been a land apart, fertile, ancient, and deeply spiritual. There he began to build a dynasty of his own. But not before securing something more symbolic. Alexander's body. The cities he founded, especially Alexandria in Egypt, became centers of trade, scholarship, and cultural exchange. In libraries and lecture halls, in temples and marketplaces, his story was retold. Only the stars remain, constant and cold, just as they were when Alexander once looked skyward from a Persian plateau, wondering what lay beyond the horizon.
Oh.
Those same men stared at one another with narrowed eyes, each wondering who might reach for the scepter. A lizard basks on sun-warmed marble. Some argued for joint rule, a regency perhaps, until the child was born. Others whispered of division. Spheres of influence was reimagined as Delcarnain, the two-horned one, a righteous figure who built a great wall to contain the forces of chaos. In Jewish and Christian texts, his conquests were sometimes seen as part of divine prophecy. In Persian literature, he was a romantic hero, a wanderer, a seeker of truth. In medieval Europe, he starred in fables and romances, battling dragons and sailing to the edge of the world. And so began the Wars of the Diadochi, a slow, brutal dismemberment of an empire that had stretched from the Ionian Sea to the edges of India. Ptolemy, clever and pragmatic, moved quickly. It was said that Alexander's corpse had not decayed, that it remained unspoiled, almost divine in preservation. The body was first buried in Memphis. Meanwhile, other fragments of the empire took shape. Seleucus, another general, laid claim to the eastern provinces, Babylonia, Persia, Media, and beyond. Antigonus, the most powerful of the Diadochi, one by one, the generals carved the empire into pieces. It became less a single story, and more a constellation. Scattered lights connected by memory. And yet, Alexander remained. Not in person, not in power, but in legacy. Across the centuries, his name would echo in ways few others ever had. He became mythologized, In Islamic tradition, every culture shaped him to its own needs. Warrior, philosopher, tyrant, prophet. And through it all, the real man blurred into shadow. Today, his name still lingers in strange places. Towns in Asia named Iskandar, but his tomb has never been found. Some believe it lies beneath the modern city of Alexandria, hidden by centuries of silt and stone. In a way, it seems fitting. For a man who walked into legend, whose ambition knew no bounds, perhaps the only proper grave is the mystery itself. And now, the lights grow dim. The thunder of horses has long faded. The great palaces are in ruins, the mosaic floors cracked, scrolls scattered or burned. You might imagine standing on a hill overlooking one of his long-lost cities. The wind is cool, the grasses sway. Somewhere below, beneath soil and stone, rest fragments of amphory, of armor, of forgotten dreams. A column tilts under the weight of time, and you, far from the march of empires, are at peace. The echoes of conquest are soft now, distant, no longer troubling. They dissolve into the stillness of night. And so does he, and so do we. And now the journey is behind you. You've walked the dusty fields of ancient Macedonia, tasted the barley porridge, felt the scratch of wool against your skin, and shivered beside a smoky hearth as a storm rolled in over distant hills. You've watched a boy become a conqueror, a young man chasing shadows, chasing gods, chasing the edges of every known map. You've stood beside him in marble halls and on desert cliffs as cities bowed and legends took root. You followed his footsteps into mystery, down corridors of myth into buried tombs, through echoes of poetry and politics, across centuries that tried and failed to forget him. And finally, you've seen what was left behind. You've stood on the far edge of history and looked back through the dust. The shattered empire, the squabbling generals, the quiet fall of greatness into memory. And now, as if muffled by time or held behind thick velvet curtains in some forgotten theater, the empire sleeps. The conqueror dreams no more. Now you rest. The past, with all its noise and glory and grief, has softened into stillness. The clang of bronze, the cries of battle, the trumpet calls of kings, they are far away now. And you, in this moment, are not in Babylon or Egypt or the high plains of Persia. You are here, safe, warm, surrounded by the quiet familiarity of the present. No one is calling you to march, no one is demanding tribute, no maps need drawing, no horses need saddling. To fight for it, to flee from it, tonight the world does not need conquering. You have learned, gently, what it meant to carry the weight of empire, to live beneath it, to survive it, or not. And now, all that remains is the soft exhale of the past. A memory within a memory, a flame gone cold. Let it drift, let it fade, let it rest. The life of Alexander the Great is over, and your own quieter journey into sleep has just begun. Good night.